All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching EXXX Hale. I would normally say something like, I hope you enjoyed the show, but I'm positive that you did, knowing the show as well as I do. My name is Zach Apony. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the production dramaturg for all the BAKKHAI variations, including this one.
And I'm Alexandra Espinoza. I'm the playwright of EXXX HALE, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Cat Ramirez. I am the director for EXXX HALE, and I use she and they pronouns interchangeably, which for me means use both of them. Don't just use she. Thank you.
Thank you both. My first question, we're just going to have a little conversation, the three of us, to give people more context. And so my first question is for Zandra, or Alexandra, whichever you prefer.
In this Zoom, I am known as Zandra, so that's pretty cool.
That's great. You were first commissioned by Villanova Theater to write something inspired by BAKKHAI, Euripides' BAKKHAI, but specifically Anne Carson's version of it. So what about, this ancient story and or Anne Carson's particular take on it inspired you to write this play?
Well, I can say that there are a few phrases in EXXX HALE that come straight from Anne Carson's work, and I think it's because I really appreciate how straightforward her poetry is. Some of those phrases are talking about the desire before the desire, and I should say that in Anne Carson's piece, she has this lovely foreword that, having not seen it performed, I don't know how people tend to incorporate that, but it's this really lovely kind of combination of Euripides' text and Anne Carson's experience of Euripides' text. And I think that just opens it up in a different way. I think it makes the work a bit more self-conscious, which maybe just let me in a bit more. So definitely her poetic phrases, but also this may be because it's a classic Greek tragedy and has catharsis and is literally engineered to make me feel empathy, but I really empathized with Pentheus in this way that I think the kind of figure that Pentheus represents in our time now in 2020 would be impossible for me to empathize with someone with that level of political power and that level of social conservatism. But I guess because of that empathy drive, I guess I read Pentheus, I read him as someone struggling with rigidity more than struggling with this reactive conservatism. And I think that I can definitely empathize and identify with those places in our lives where, for whatever reason, we hold on to an insecurity and it manifests as rigidity. And I think that opened up a world for me about people who I know, love, and I know are flawed. And I think that was my way in, particularly through Nadia's character of someone who has a lot of love to give and is experiencing a rigid take on a certain element of love and trying to step through that.
It's really lovely. And another factor of this is that part of the commissioning was preparing you to have this be produced, over Zoom or digitally, and in the way that we've produced all these variations, we've had to accommodate for those safety guidelines. So as a playwright, how did writing for those sorts of concerns change or not change your process?
I think I really struggled in the first few months of the quarantine to really kind of find my artistic footing. And just knowing how much our field was changing so rapidly. And I think that, honestly, I think the commission was a real gift in that sense, that the idea of having to strictly write for a virtual medium, the idea of it strictly being connected to this ancient text, which is like a thing I love to do in general as a playwright, it opened it up in a way that, and I think this is something Michael has said previously, but it opened it up in a way that it no longer felt like a constriction. It felt like, here's the game, here's the puzzle. And I had also in my own personal life been really reliant on these moments on Zoom where people were being creative and where people were, you know, I have had the privilege of going to a Zoom dance party, and it blew my mind to see people like so committed to finding the joy that we're used to finding in spaces that are no longer accessible to us. So I think that it was all of those combined factors of being able to bring that all together in one piece.
Yeah, and I kind of want to throw this over to Kat, because you had to direct this, of course, also over Zoom. So how did Zoom directing treat you? How does it feel different? Is it the same? How is it the same?
Oh, it's definitely not. It's definitely not the same. Yeah, I think working with a piece that was written specifically for Zoom felt like a real blessing. Because like I think it helped to like really zero in on like what is the reality of like living in this box where we live, because we live in boxes now, and like to really dig into kind of the mundanity of Zoom calls a little bit. And so like by working with the piece that was specifically written for Zoom, it allowed, I think similarly to writing the piece specifically for Zoom, it allowed us to look at the technology as a way to like open it up, and a way to really try to tell the story of these people. And I think particularly like with this play that like straddles like realism and this incredibly like magical world. And it's either like one or the other a lot of times. It was really great to look at Zoom as a way of like, great, so how do we communicate this like mundane world that like we're all sitting in right now, but then also how do we communicate the mystical and the godly and the otherworldly? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess to zoom out a little bit inside of that, Kat, like what was your first response to this play? Like when you first got your hands on it, on Sandra's first draft, what got you excited to direct it?
It was so hot. It was a really sexy play. Like, yeah, I mean, like, Xandra and I have been trying to work together for a minute. So I think the first thing that struck me was like, oh, hell yeah, like, of course. Just really wanting to work with Xandra. But I think reading the text, and it was really sexy. And I haven't encountered anything particularly, like, we've been going to Zoom readings and things, and I've started to see like Zoom specific pieces, but like not necessarily things that were so specific and intimate in the way that Xandra was writing. And there was a real, not just like, and I'm not just talking about like the sex scenes, but there was a real like quiet and like sacredness about the relationship that we were working through. That was like so beautiful and real, and like the quality, the worst qualities of every character felt like a read on my own character in a way. But I think reading that and being like, oh yeah, I think everybody could read this and identify themselves as either the Cecily or the Nadia in a relationship very, very easily. And that was really wonderful. Yeah. And just immediately reading it and feeling all of those like cringy, awkward moments of like, I've totally had that in my relationship where I'm trying to figure out what polyamory is when I'm not like, and still working through all of my like own internalized shit. Yeah, I thought it was just like so wonderfully written. Yeah.
Yeah, I could confirm that many times throughout the rehearsal process, Kat would say something and we would all be like, that's us, that's who we are. You've totally
Cat
put your finger on
Ramirez.
it. That's the right.
I didn't mean to.
Yes.
I had to like keep saying that. I was like, yes, I'm doing a full read for everybody, but it's also me reading myself all the time.
Totally.
Yeah, it was really lovely. What does it mean for both of you? I'll start. We can start off with Xandra, to reimagine or just to imagine Dionysian ritual through a BIPOC queer lens.
I feel like for me, and what I think was really exciting about engaging with BAKKHAI in this moment in time, is that very rightly so, there is a very urgent focus on the existential threats towards BIPOC people in this country and in this world in this moment. And those threats in the last 6 months have been debilitating and devastating, and their, you know, impact on the mental health of BIPOC communities and BIPOC queer communities has been really frightening, and a thing that as a member of those communities I've been grappling with and not really finding my footing still. And BAKKHAI is just so free and so, like, you know, the boundaries around expression in the original are just, you know, there are none. And I think that I really needed that just as a human. I think I was really craving that kind of liberation. And I think that made me realize so much of the work that I've been doing personally and politically and with my loved ones, et cetera, has been about liberation in the last, well, our whole lives and our whole lineages. But I think that being able to sit with that, like, sexy, delicious, transcendent liberation, I was like, yeah, I mean, literally 9 to 5, it's like the bullet points of surviving, you know, a white supremacy culture and a late capitalist state. So like after 5, like maybe it can be fun and sexy. And that just really being the medicine I needed. So I think that it was a really kind of, I don't want to say happy accident, but I think that, you know, there was a resonant reason that Villanova wanted to produce BAKKHAI originally. There was a resonant reason to want to see what happens when you bring BAKKHAI into 2020. And those were just resonances that really like sat with me and really kind of amplified some stuff I was already experiencing.
Yeah, Kat, do you have anything to tack on there?
Oh man, I'm trying to remember right now. Something I was saying during like auditions and callbacks that I'm not quite capturing as articulately as I'd like. But yeah, I think largely like reading this play and seeing like, oh, this is a clearly abolitionist play. This is looking at like acknowledging the body and pleasure and sex in the face of everything that is going on for BIPOC queer communities right now, and being like, fuck no, I'll take my freedom. Fuck no, I will continue to look at this world as a place of abundance. And that is so radical and like so, I think just like, I think something that like BIPOC queer communities, a reason why those relationships are like so sacred is like every day you are making that choice to look at the world and look at your love with abundance when everything is against you. And to have those hard conversations, to get yourself to look at it that way, because like that's not an easy thing to do. And Xandra's play has really captured that. Yeah.
I think you're selling yourself short, Kat. That was beautiful. That was really great, both of you. My next kind of question is really complicated because going into this as dramaturg, I was really interested in because the Dionysian aspect is all about like connection and communion, and we're producing right now where there are literal barriers that we are putting between ourselves for our safety. And I guess I'm curious, like, how do you, like, because I feel like this play got the closest of really getting down to that Dionysian spirit. And I'm curious, like, how did you find that? Like, how did you find ways to bridge connection and communion over the barriers that we're facing, both like Zoom, but also like social and political and personal? That can be to either of you.
I mean, I'll say something to throw it to Kat, which is that I feel like there was a lot about, so much about this play I didn't know till Kat was in the room with it. But I feel like what Kat brought to the play, visually speaking, and just kind of like the curating of, I mean, and also just like deep gratitude and awe to our actors who were like, yes, come into my bedroom and make this work. But being able to curate just like the visual patterns of our moment, and like, I personally think that some of how we got to the Dionysian was like, as Kat has been talking about, like the mundanity, but like getting to see like these little pieces of these characters' personalities, and like recognizing like, oh yeah, this person would react that way to a dance party on Zoom. So if there's stuff you want to add from that, Kat, but that felt like a big part of it.
Yeah, I think also like just doing a big shout out to you and your work, Zach, in the room, because I think like I was coming into this not knowing a ton about Dionysian ritual and like the BAKKHAI, and I know, Xandra, when we were like in initial reads of the script, you're like, hey, actually don't read the source material because I want to make sure this kind of can stand alone. And so I think in some ways in the room, like I leaned on you, Zach, a lot for making sure a lot of that sung. And I had appreciated kind of like your eagle eyes on, I think your eagle eyes on just like making those connections, and like, you know, like taking Ange into a breakout room so you could have a really long conversation around just the evolution of Dionysus. And I think that also falls into the play of like, I think Xandra has wrote like such a strong Dionysus figure in the piece that I think connected a lot of those like very mundane, extremely human experience of Zoom, and allowed it to transcend transcend like the way we see digital space in a way that felt kind of really seamless. And I think Ange, all the actors were truly so incredible. And I think Ange did a really, really fantastic job of like really, really, really thinking about and specifying like who is the Dionysus for this play? Like where are they at also in their own process of healing from the years of like trauma and rage that this figure has carried throughout history? Because I think the Dionysus that we get is somebody who is quite centered, and they found a real peace and a real fervent love for their community. And I think it wasn't until like we really started like table working and figuring out who that character was in history, that kind of the Dionysian elements really started to click. Like seeing that particular god as somebody who has like brought about like, who was like very rageful and like, I don't know, again, don't know Greek stuff too well, but like my perception of Dionysus prior to this was like somebody who was super rageful, who was like very lecherous, and like also super fun, but was dealing with, frankly, like a lot of like complex PTSD, and that was getting taken out on all the humans around them. And so like, what is it like to look at Dionysus as a person who has like healed from all of that trauma, and now is here to just like to help the queer BIPOC community through like a really hard and scary time, because they've done it before.
Yeah, in those conversations, Ange and I really enjoyed just the idea of wholesome Dionysus is a thing that Kat said, and just like, yeah, finding that post-trauma world for that character. Yeah, it was a really beautiful character to see come to life.
Yeah.
I could say more, but you know, I want to try to be brief.
Yeah. I was like,
go ahead.
No, I was like, yeah, and I think there were some things we started discovering later in the process too, around tracking like the shift in Cecily before and after meeting Dionysus, and like what is that energy? Like what does it look like to have a human crush, and then what does it look like to have a crush on a god? And how to and just like how to connect all of those things together.
Yeah, I think it really came through. And this is my last question. It's always the hardest, so don't feel free to take it wherever you want. And it's what do you both hope audiences get from this show?
For a very specific audience, I will say, for other members of the BIPOC queer community, I would say, I hope you have a lot of fun watching this. I hope you have as much fun watching it as we did making it, because we all really, really need some fun, and not the kind of fun that totally ignores or negates or dismisses the loads that we're carrying, but fun that uplifts us and pushes us forward.
Yeah. Kat?
Yeah, you just like feel a little more full. Yeah, I think that's what I've got. And also, like, wholesome Dionysus is like a thing that I want people to carry with them. But yeah, I think just that. I forgot to give a quick shout out to Eli Lynn, who was the intimacy consultant on the show. And particularly if we're talking through like the Dionysian rituals, they were like really paramount in helping to create a safe space, and also like really, I think, opening everybody in the room's minds to like how to communicate all of these like super intimate scenes over Zoom in ways that we didn't know were possible. So they were also like hugely instrumental in that. Yeah.
I have one other thing to say that I would want audiences to get from this, which is just that, like, you know, love is very imperfect, but like people are always going to be different, and there's always space in between to move towards each other. And I feel like that's what Cecily and Nadia learn by the end of it, and what Dion helps them learn and gives them the space to learn. So that'd be the other thing.
That's lovely. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for all of your thoughts and insights. And thank you, audience members at home, for hanging out and listening to us gab. And hopefully I'll see you at the end of some of the other variations.
That's a great shirt, Kat.
Thank you.
They're all, yeah.
Great shirt for you, Xandra.
Zach, I really like that curl in your hair.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.